Welcome to the Apocryphal Archive. Stop scrolling. Do not look away. What I am about to tell you has been deliberately hidden from you. It is the story that was erased to control what you believe. In our last investigation, we opened the vault. We looked upon the empty space on the shelf, the shadow cast by the books that were deliberately removed from the canon. We named this collection of forbidden lore the Forbidden Scriptures, and we asked why. We found that these books were not just lost to time. They were casualties of a war for control, a war of politics, power, and narrative. Today, we take the first and most dangerous book from that dark shelf. A book so explosive, so cosmologically chaotic, that it was not only banned, but actively hunted and erased from the memory of the Western world for over 1,000 years. It is a text that is quoted in the canonical New Testament, yet it was condemned as heresy by the very church that built the canon. It is a book that claims to be the director's cut of Genesis, the missing chapter that explains the true origin of evil, the true reason for the Great Flood, and the true identity of the demons that plague humanity. This is not the story of a serpent and an apple. This is the story of a cosmic invasion, a conspiracy hatched in the highest heavens. A rebellion of angels who looked upon humanity not with love, but with lust. This is the story of the Book of Enoch, and this is the revelation of the forbidden knowledge that the Watchers gave to mankind, a gift of damnation that forced God to wash the world clean with fire and water. This is the lore of the angels who corrupted humanity. Before we open this forbidden text, we must first look at the lock it was designed to open. The clue is sitting in plain sight, in your own canonical Bible. Go to the book of Genesis, chapter 6. Just before the story of Noah and the flood, the text records one of the most bizarre, cryptic, and unexplained events in all of Scripture. It reads, "When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose." And then, just a few lines later, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown." And what happens immediately after this? The very next verse says, "The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land." Think about this. For millennia, theologians have been baffled by these verses. The canonical Bible never explains this sequence. It never explains who these sons of God, B'nai Elohim in Hebrew, were. Were they angels? Were they just righteous human kings? The text doesn't say. It never explains why their union with human women was so catastrophic. It never explains how it led to a wickedness so profound that God Himself regretted His own creation. The text gives us the event and then a terrible, deafening silence. But the silence is not empty. For thousands of years, an answer to this mystery was circulating. A text so ancient and revered that the earliest church fathers, men like Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Origen, and Tertullian, all knew it, read it, and quoted it as Scripture. A book that was, for hundreds of years, part of the accepted Christian lore. It is even quoted directly in the New Testament, in the canonical Epistle of Jude, which cites Enoch, the seventh from Adam, and his prophecy. It was the Book of Enoch, named for the mysterious patriarch, the seventh from Adam, who, as Genesis 5 tells us in another cryptic line, walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Enoch, the story goes, did not die. He was translated. He was taken alive into the heavens, and he was shown the secrets of the cosmos. He was made a scribe for the angels, a witness to the inner workings of the divine council, and a prophet who would warn both heaven and earth of the coming judgment. And in his book, in the section we now call the Book of the Watchers, he tells us the full story. He fills the silence left by Genesis. He unmasks the sons of God. He tells us that this was not a simple, isolated sin. It was a conspiracy. Here in the archive, we will now unseal his testimony. Enoch writes that in the beginning, in the high heavens, God had appointed a class of angels to a specific task. They were the Iden, the Watchers. Their purpose, as their name implies, was to observe humanity, to guide it from a distance, to be celestial guardians of the young, burgeoning race of Adam. They were stationed on the earth, high on the summit of Mount Hermon, a holy place that acts as a bridge between the spiritual and material realms. For generations, they performed their duty. They watched. They saw humanity grow, multiply, and fill the valleys below. They saw the daughters of man, the descendants of Cain and Seth, and they saw that they were beautiful. And then a sickness began, a thought, a desire, a rebellion born not of pride, as Lucifer's was said to be, but of lust. 1. Among them, a chief of the angels stood and spoke. The book names him Semjaza. He saw the daughters of men, and he was consumed by desire. He turned to the other angels in his command, and he proposed an idea, a transgression. Come, he said, let us choose for ourselves wives from among the children of men, and let us beget children. The other watchers were afraid. They knew the price. They knew this was a violation of their very nature. They were spirit, humans were flesh. The boundary was absolute, set by God himself. But Semjaza was cunning. He knew they were afraid of the punishment, afraid of being the only ones to fall. So he proposed a different kind of sin, a collective one. If you will not do this, he said, then I fear that I alone shall be held accountable for this great sin. But if you will, let us all swear an oath. Let us all bind ourselves by mutual implications, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. And so it was done. On the summit of Mount Hermon, a number that the book records as 200, the chiefs of the entire angelic order on earth descended. They gathered and they swore an oath, damning themselves together, so that no one angel could be blamed alone. They bound their conspiracy with a curse, and the mountain, from that day, was called Hermon, the mountain of the oath. This was the original sin, not a man and a woman in a garden, but a conspiracy of angels on a mountaintop. This was the moment the barrier between heaven and earth was breached, not by God, but by his own sons. The 200 angels, led by Semjaza and their other chiefs, whose names the book chillingly preserves, a roster of the fallen, descended from the mountain. They came among the daughters of men. They took them as wives. They began to teach them, and they began to defile themselves with them. And this is where the story of corruption truly begins. The Watchers' sin was not just lust, it was betrayal. They had been entrusted to be guardians, and they became corruptors. They had access to the secrets of the cosmos, the divine knowledge of God's creation. And in their lust, in their desire to please and bind their new human wives to them, they opened the archive. They revealed the forbidden knowledge that humanity was never meant to possess. This, more than any other act, is what sealed the planet's doom. The canonical Genesis story is a story of moral failing. A man and a woman disobeyed a command. The Book of Enoch tells a different, far more terrifying story. It is a story of cosmological contamination. It is a story of an unauthorized, catastrophic transfer of technology. Enoch's text provides a detailed, itemized list of who taught what. It is a charge sheet for the trial of the angels. The leader, Semjaza, who is also called Armaros in some texts, taught enchantments and root cuttings. This was not agriculture. This was sorcery. This was pharmacology, the knowledge of how to use the elements of the earth to control and manipulate the body and the mind, to create potions and curses, to bind spirits and heal unnaturally. He gave humanity the keys to magic. But the chief corrupter, the true villain of Enoch's story, was not Semjaza. It was another. His name was Azazel. The text of Enoch places the blame for the entire catastrophe on his shoulders. Azazel, the text says, taught men war. He revealed the eternal secrets of metallurgy. He showed humanity who had lived in relative peace how to make knives and swords and shields and breastplates. He taught them to see the earth not as a garden, but as a mine. He showed them how to extract metals, how to sharpen them, how to kill with them. He gave them the tools of slaughter. Before this, the world of Genesis had known only one murder, a crime of passion, Cain against Abel. Azazel did not invent murder. He industrialized it. He gave humanity the ability to create armies, to wage organized war, to protect themselves not with God's providence, but with sharpened steel and hardened bronze. He taught them to build defenses against each other, and, by implication, against God. But Azazel's corruption was twofold. It was not just for the men. For the women, he brought a different and, in Enoch's view, an equally destructive knowledge. He taught them the art of ornaments and cosmetics. He showed them how to make their eyelids beautiful, how to use coal and antimony. He taught them about precious stones and tinctures. He revealed the art of deception. Why was this forbidden? Why would makeup and jewelry be a sin on par with creating swords and shields? Because, in the philosophy of Enoch, they are two sides of the same coin. Azazel gave men the tools of violence, the means to take what they desire. And he gave women the tools of vanity, the means to inflame that desire. It was a perfect feedback loop of damnation. He taught humanity how to create a false beauty, how to make the face a mask to incite lust. He taught them to objectify themselves, to see value not in their God-given image, but in an artificial one. The sword and the mascara, the breastplate and the bracelet. Azazel taught humanity how to make war, and how to become objects of desire worth making war over. He introduced violence and the vanity that fuels it. He corrupted the body just as he corrupted the earth. The corruption spread. It was a flood of knowledge that drowned humanity's innocence. Another watcher, Barakel, taught astrology. He taught men the signs of the stars. This wasn't astronomy, the simple navigation by the cosmos that God had ordained. This was astrology, the belief that the stars, not God, controlled human destiny. It was the art of divination, of seeking to know the future, of bypassing divine will to seize control of one's own fate. It was a theological attack. It replaced divine providence with impersonal fate. It told humans, you are controlled by the stars, not by God, which is the ultimate tool for apathy, sin, and the abdication of moral responsibility. Another, Kokabel, taught the constellations, the lore of the zodiac, the personification of the stars. He gave humanity new gods to worship, pulling their gaze away from the creator of the stars and onto the stars themselves. Another, Gadriel, taught the art of cosmetics and, chillingly, the killing blows to men. He refined Azazel's crude art of war into a science of death. Another, Penemu, taught the children of men the bitter and the sweet. He taught men the art of writing with ink and paper. This is perhaps the most shocking and subtle revelation of all. Even writing, the very act of creating a permanent record, was seen as a forbidden art. Why? Because it was a form of magic. It was a way to resolve enchantments, to bind secrets, to create contracts. It takes the living, breathing oral tradition, which must be passed from a wise person to a student, and freezes it. It allows knowledge to be stolen, mass-produced, and divorced from wisdom. It is the tool of administration for evil. It is the ultimate forbidden magic, the ability to make a lie permanent. This was the corruption. The Watchers, in their arrogance and lust, gave humanity the fire of the gods, the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and humanity was not ready. They were given the technology of angels, and it poisoned them. The world was transformed. It became a place of sorcery, of war, of vanity, of astrology, of knowledge without wisdom, and power without God. It became a world where humans, armed with angelic weapons and forbidden sorcery, no longer had to fear God, because they could play God. And this was only the first consequence. The second was far worse. It was a biological and spiritual nightmare. The union of these two races, of spirit and flesh, was an abomination. It was a perversion of God's created order. And from this union, children were born. The canonical Bible calls them Nephilim. The Book of Enoch describes them in horrifying detail. They were not just mighty men. They were giants, unnatural, monstrous, and eternally, insatiably hungry. Enoch's text says these giants were 300 cubits tall, an impossible symbolic height. A description meant to convey their otherness, their monstrous scale that dwarfed all of creation. They were a plague upon the earth. The text reads, "And they grew and they consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind." This is the origin of cannibalism, the origin of total, world-consuming violence. The giants, these half-angelic, half-human abominations, were a force of pure consumption. They were the physical embodiment of the Watchers' unrestrained lust. Their hunger was a void that could not be filled. They began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. The world, which God had created with perfect order, had descended into a nightmare of cosmic horror. It was a world of cannibalistic giants, of human armies wielding angelic weapons, of women practicing sorcery and seduction, of men looking to the stars for answers while their monstrous children devoured them in the fields. This is the great wickedness that Genesis 6 speaks of. It was not simple human misbehavior. It was a total contamination of the created order. The very bloodline of Adam was being corrupted, polluted by an alien, angelic source. The genome of humanity was being rewritten. The corruption was so total that humanity could not even cry out to God for help. They had forgotten him. They were too busy learning the arts of war and sorcery. So the earth itself cried out. Enoch writes that the earth, bereft of its children, its surface stained with the blood of men and giants, cried out to the gates of heaven. And in heaven, the prayer was finally heard. The unfallen angels, the archangels in the high presence of God, looked down. The text names them Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel. They looked down from their holy place and saw the blood being shed and the lawlessness being wrought upon the earth. They saw the stain, and they spoke to each other. "The spirits and souls of men are making suit," they said, saying, "Bring our cause before the Most High." They saw Azazel teaching all unrighteousness on earth and revealing the eternal secrets which were guarded in heaven. They saw Semjaza, their brother, to whom God had given authority to rule over his associates, now leading them in defilement. They ascended to the throne of God. They said, "You see, Lord, what Azazel has done, and Semjaza has taught sorcery, and they have gone to the daughters of men and have slept with them, and have defiled themselves. And the women have borne giants, and the whole earth has thereby been filled with blood and unrighteousness." And then God spoke. The judgment was passed. It was a judgment in 3 parts for the 3 parties involved: for humanity, for the giants, and for the fallen watchers. First, God spoke to Uriel. "Go," he commanded, "to the son of Lamech, to Noah, and tell him, hide yourself, and reveal to him the end that is approaching, that the whole earth will be destroyed. A deluge is about to come, and it will destroy all that is on it. And teach him how he may escape, and how his seed may be preserved for all generations." Here in the Book of Enoch, we find the true context of the flood. It was not a plan A to punish humanity. It was a plan B. It was a cosmic cleansing, a disinfection. It was the only way to wash the supernatural stain of the Nephilim and the corrupted bloodlines from the face of the planet. Why was Noah chosen? Genesis 6:9 says, "Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation." The key word here is generation, which can also mean his genealogy. Noah wasn't just a nice guy. He was, perhaps, the last of Adam's line whose DNA was pure, whose bloodline was uncorrupted by the Nephilim. God regretted making man because his creation had been hacked. It had been contaminated by his own sons. The flood was a global, agonizing, and necessary act of chemotherapy to save the world from an angelic cancer. Second, God spoke to Raphael. "Go, Raphael," he commanded, "and bind Azazel hand and foot. Cast him into the darkness. Make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudael, and cast him in, and place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him remain there forever. And on the great day of judgment he shall be cast into the fire." This is the origin of the scapegoat ritual in Leviticus, where a goat, symbolically bearing the sins of Israel, is sent to Azazel in the wilderness. Azazel, the angel who taught war and vanity, becomes the symbol of all sin, bound and cast into the wilderness. He is the first to be imprisoned and the last to be judged. Third, God spoke to Gabriel. "Go, Gabriel," he said, "to the giants, to the Nephilim, to the bastards, and destroy the children of the watchers from amongst men. Send them against one another. Let them destroy each other by mutual slaughter." The fathers, the watchers, would be given a terrible punishment. They would be forced to watch as their monstrous children, whom they had created in their lust, were driven mad by a spirit of confusion to turn on and annihilate each other. God's poetic justice. The watchers created them through a conspiracy of unity. God destroys them by turning them against each other in disunity. Fourth, God spoke to Michael. "Go, Michael," he commanded, "bind Semjaza and his associates, who have defiled themselves with women. Bind them in the valleys of the earth for 70 generations, until the day of the great judgment. In those days they shall be led off to the abyss of fire, to the torment and the prison in which they shall be confined forever." This is the fate of the watchers, not hell, not yet, but a prison under the earth, bound in darkness to await the final end. They who had lusted for the flesh of the earth would be imprisoned within it. But the judgment was not complete. There was one more task. It was a task for the only man who had ever bridged the gap between the worlds. It was a task for Enoch. God called Enoch the Enoch, scribe of righteousness. He gave him the most terrible and perhaps the most tragic mission in all of cosmic history. Enoch, a man, was ordered to go to the fallen watchers and be the one to deliver their final, irreversible sentence. Imagine the scene. The watchers, these former gods, these celestial beings of fire and spirit, now saw the world collapsing. They had seen their giant children slaughtering each other. They felt the power of heaven turning against them, and they were afraid. They could no longer ascend. Their prayers were blocked. They were trapped. So they turned to the one being who could still travel between the worlds. They called for Enoch. They begged him, "Enoch, you scribe, go, say to the watchers, you will have no peace. A great sentence has gone forth against you. You will be bound. You will have no rest. You have shown men what is forbidden, and on account of this, you will have no peace." Enoch, the human, journeyed to the prison of the angels. He found them weeping. He found Semjaza, their great leader, his face covered in despair. And Enoch, the scribe, read them their doom. He told them, "From henceforth you shall never ascend into heaven, and on earth you shall be bound, as long as the world endures. And before that you shall have seen the destruction of your beloved children. You will have no peace." This is the tragedy of the watchers, a story of lust, conspiracy, and catastrophic consequence. It is the hidden lore that explains everything. It explains the origin of war. It was a gift from Azazel. It explains the origin of sorcery. It was a lesson from Semjaza. It explains the origin of demons. This is the most crucial piece of lore. The book explains that when the Nephilim, the giants, were finally killed, their physical bodies died, but they were half spirit. Their spirits, being from heaven and earth, could not ascend to heaven, for they were polluted, and could not go to Sheol, for they were not fully human. So their spirits remained. Enoch's text says, "The spirits of the giants shall be on earth, and shall be called evil spirits. They shall afflict, oppress, destroy, and they shall do battle and work destruction on the earth and do mischief." This is the missing piece of the puzzle. The Bible speaks of demons, but never explains their origin. The Book of Enoch provides the definitive, terrifying answer. The demons that plague humanity, the evil spirits of the New Testament, are the disembodied, eternally hungry, and hateful ghosts of the Nephilim. This explains why the demons in the Gospels are so desperate to possess a body. Whether it is the flesh of a man, like the Gerasene demoniac, or even the flesh of pigs, their evil spirit is defined by the all-consuming, disembodied hunger they inherited from their giant fathers. They are the echoes of the corruption left to roam the earth after the flood washed their bodies away. Let's pause the investigation for a moment. This is the core revelation. Does this story of the Watchers and the Nephilim suddenly change how you read the New Testament? Does it change your understanding of demonic possession, of the unclean spirits that Jesus was casting out? Let me know in the comments, has this revelation connected the dots for you? Just type "mind blown" if this is the first time you're hearing this connection. And while you're there, if you're getting value from this investigation, please like this video. It tells the algorithm that this forbidden lore deserves to be heard. Now, back to the archive. This legacy of demons is the legacy of the Watchers. Their sin was not a single act. It was a virus that they unleashed upon the world, a corruption so deep it required a flood, and a spiritual plague of demons that survived the flood and continues to this day. Now, we must ask the final question, the question of the archive. Why was this book banned? Why would a book so integral, so cited, so useful for explaining the world be declared heresy? The answer is the same as it was for all the Apocrypha. Because it was too dangerous. First, it complicates the origin of sin. The orthodox canonical narrative needs the fall of man to be man's fault. The story of Adam and Eve in Genesis 3 places the blame squarely on human disobedience. This is clean. It makes humanity fully responsible. It creates the concept of original sin, a doctrine upon which the entire Orthodox theology of salvation rests. The Book of Enoch, however, is messy. It claims that the primary source of evil, the corruption of the world, was an angelic failure. It claims humanity was taught to sin, that we were victims of an invasion by superior beings. This is a profound theological problem. If sin was an infection, not a choice, how can man be held fully accountable? This story shifts the blame from Eden to Mount Hermon. Second, it creates a cosmological chaos. The text of Enoch describes a universe full of angels and demons with names, jobs, and personalities. It describes a divine council where some members can rebel and fail. This is a universe that is not a simple monarchy, but a complex, warring bureaucracy. For later theologians who were trying to build a unified, all-powerful, and simple concept of God, this lore was too complex. It was too pagan. It was too much like the myths of the Greeks and Babylonians, with gods warring and lusting after humans. Third, it was too influential with the wrong people. The very fact that the Gnostics and other heretical groups loved this text, that they used it to explain their complex cosmologies, made it suspect to the Orthodox. The Church Fathers who were fighting for a unified, canonical Christianity had to cut this lore out to cleanse the story. To fight the heretics, the Orthodox Church had to ban their source code. Fourth, it reframes the flood. In the canonical story, the flood is a moral judgment. God is sad that humanity is evil. In Enoch's version, the flood is a genetic and cosmological cleansing. It's not just a punishment for bad behavior. It's a desperate act of cosmic quarantine. God isn't just regretful. He's a divine surgeon, cutting out a cancer that his own angelic order unleashed. This is a biological, cosmic horror story, not a simple morality tale. And so, the Book of the Watchers was declared apocryphal, forbidden. It was erased. It was lost to the Western world for nearly 1,500 years. It was only known through fragments and citations in other ancient texts. It was not until 1773 that the Scottish explorer James Bruce, searching for the source of the Nile, traveled to Ethiopia and found the book. He found that the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, one of the oldest Christian communions on earth, cut off from the West for centuries, had never banned the book. They had kept it in their Bible. They had been reading it, studying it, and singing it all along. They had preserved the forbidden lore that the rest of the world had been forced to forget. What was discovered in those mountains was the archive, our archive. The story of the Watchers is a warning. It is a warning that knowledge without wisdom is corruption, that power without restraint is monstrous, that the line between guardian and corrupter is perilously thin. We have now examined the first and most powerful of the forbidden scriptures, but the lore is deep and the archive is vast. The Watchers were a group of angels who fell through lust. But what about the first angel, the one who fell alone? The angel of light, the morning star, Lucifer? And what about the story of the first human rebel, the one who was not Eve, but before her? The corruption, as we will find, did not begin on Mount Hermon. It began in the Garden of Eden, with a story that has been even more deeply buried. If this investigation has opened your eyes, then you must subscribe to the Apocryphal Archive. And be sure to click the bell icon because you do not want to miss what we are opening next. Our next investigation will unseal the story of the woman who was erased from Genesis, the one who refused to obey Adam, the first wife, the first rebel, the mother of demons. We are going to tell the forbidden story of Lilith. Until then, keep listening to the silence. The archive remains open.